Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuki. Coming up,
there are still fundamental differences between some of the more conservative anti-independence parties and the largest independence groups.
the states of New Caledonia 9 months on since the riots. Also,
it's something we talked about at the club. I mean, we got 2 yellow cards in the weekend and they killed us, even though, we went to half-time.
Pacific Super Rugby teams hoping for better luck in their next games, and a new feature film strikes an emotional chord. 9 months after being torn apart by violence, how is New Caledonia coping? Don Wiseman put this question to journalist Nick McLeland.
Over the last few weeks, there's been a series of meetings in Paris between France's Overseas Minister, Manuel Valls, and 6 delegations of New Caledonian political leaders. They've been bilateral meetings, so Valls and other French officials have met individually with key leaders from both the independence movement, FLNKS, and also the conservative anti-independence parties. He will then fly this coming Saturday, the 22nd of February, for an 8-day visit to New Caledonia in the hope of kick-starting discussions about a new political statute. Those negotiations have been stalled for years, effectively, and because of the particular economic and political tensions that have arisen since 6 months of conflict last year.
There must have been some sort of tacit agreement that there was a need for change.
That's always been the case. The independence movement has recognised that there have to be changes in things like the electoral roll. The Noumea Accord, the framework agreement that's governed New Caledonia for 25 years, led to 3 referendums on self-determination which were held between 2018 and 2021. But this agreement, which has governed politics in New Caledonia for all this time, said if there's no yes vote, yes for independence, all parties should meet to work out a way forward. That hasn't happened effectively because over the last couple of years there's been a lot of criticism about the French state from the independence movement, and so we've now moved to a stage where people are ready to start talking. How long that will take, though, is difficult to tell because there are still fundamental differences between some of the more conservative anti-independence parties, the so-called loyalist bloc, and the largest independence groups who still want a pathway to independence. Squaring that circle will be very difficult.
This whole issue of ensuring that the Kanak vote was not going to be outnumbered, that will go by the wayside, will it?
No, that's still on the table. The FLNKS in 2018, before the first referendum, said that there was a recognition that the restricted electorate for the 3 provinces, the Congress, the government of New Caledonia, should be expanded. But they've always said that should be part of a global agreement. There are some locally born New Caledonians who, for various technical reasons, can't vote for the local political institutions. They can vote for the French presidency, the National Assembly, the European Parliament. They can't vote locally. So there's a recognition that the technical definition of who's a New Caledonian needs to be expanded. But the FLNKS has said for years and years this must be part of a global agreement, basically a trade-off. We give you something, you give us something. And what's striking is just a week ago on French media, Overseas Minister Manuel Valls said, we can't just expand the electoral body if there's not an overarching global agreement. Now, that's the independence movement's position, that any changes to voting rights has to be part of a package. And indeed, that was the crisis last year, trying to drive the independence movement, particularly the largest party Union Caledonienne, to the negotiating table. President Macron unilaterally tried to change the definition of who could vote, potentially adding thousands of extra voters, mostly anti-independence voters, to the voting rolls. He triggered the conflict that's seen incredible economic destruction. Hundreds of people lost their jobs, 2,600 arrests, 14 dead. It's been a tragedy for New Caledonia. And now we find the French coming back to the point, yes, voting rights has to be part of an overarching deal. And so we'll see in coming weeks whether people can transcend the differences that remain, and they're pretty sharp differences, to come to a package that will be acceptable to all.
Let's just look back at this period of violence and the outcomes. Where is the territory at now? I see it's got more money from Paris, but it was in a horrendous situation there for a long period of time. Has it moved on at all from there?
No, the economic political, social, cultural legacies of that 6 months of conflict starting on the 13th of May 2024 are still with the Territory. The economic situation's dire. Hundreds of businesses were badly damaged or shuttered when I was there last.
10,000 people apparently left. I guess a lot of those were business people.
Yeah, and a lot of them are French nationals who've decided after a period of uncertainty, time to go. Some New Caledonians, but mostly French-born nationals, which has changed once again the voting rights. The nickel industry, the backbone of the economy, is in terrible strife. That began before the crisis, but since then exports have dropped. A couple of the major smelters are in care and maintenance rather than operational production. When I was there last, I interviewed the head of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and he said although the conflict has stopped, the protests and fighting, many businesses, for example, can't get reinsured because the insurance companies won't cover rioting. So if you're a small business person who's been damaged, business been damaged during the conflict, wants to get operations going again, but you can't get insurance. So there are many people who are finding that. There's also been a serious loss of technical capacity in the health sector and the education sector. Many hospitals are short-staffed because it's estimated up to about 16% of the medical staff in New Caledonia have left. Most of those are French public servants, not locals. So there's no oncology doctors left. 5 oncology doctors left New Caledonia, which impacts, obviously, treatment of people with cancer. Those sorts of structural problems in public services, in the economy, key professionals leaving. It's a really tough time for working people in New Caledonia, and that obviously weighs on the political leaders, whether they support or oppose independence. They've got to deal with that economic crisis.
All right. Well, you're in Wellington because of this Pacific Islands Political Studies Association meeting. I'm sure there are people here from New Caledonia. What are they going to be saying?
I think they're going to be highlighting the remaining tensions about the way forward. For the independence movement, although there are divisions about how far and how fast should be gone, there's always a call for a pathway to independence. Some of the more conservative leaders, however, in the anti-independence parties are vehemently opposed to that. They believe that the 3 referendums held in 2018, 2021 finished the debate. The Loyalists are quite angry, in fact, that Overseas Minister Manuel Valls said on the media just the other day, we must not forget we are still in a decolonisation process. And some of the Loyalists are really angry that even before he's come this week to talk about what are the next steps, he's reminding everyone that the Noumea Accord process is a decolonisation process, and that remains on the table. The Loyalist parties have put forward a proposal about federalism. New Caledonia has 3 provinces. The southern province has always been the bastion of anti-independence leadership. The 2 other provinces, the Loyalty Islands, the north, have been managed by pro-independence Kanak leaders for more than 30 years. The notion of federalism basically says the South should secede from the rest of the country. They don't put it that bluntly, but partition is fiercely opposed by the independence people. So there's some quite divided divisions, some wanting a pathway towards a new political status, some wanting to keep the status quo within the French Republic, but with more powers to the southern province. There's a very big bridge to cross before people come to shake hands, as happened in 1988.
The messages both the Fiji and Drua and Moana Pasifika camps are receiving is simple. Get the basics right and be disciplined. Going into the second round of the Super Rugby Pacific competition this weekend, both teams have stated they've learned lessons from their losses last Saturday. Elisa Tora previews the second round of the competition.
Drua head coach Glenn Jackson says being disciplined for the full 80 minutes is a must, especially with an away game against the Hurricanes in Napier on Saturday afternoon.
It's something we talked about at the club. I mean, we got 2 yellow cards in the weekend and that killed us, even though, we went to half-time with the lead. I think it's not really those ones because we seem to go all right when we've got 14 people, but it's more the silly penalties that get us put back into the corner. We talked about a couple of more penalties that wasn't great, so we need to stop those.
The Drua mentor is expecting a tough physical contact battle, but he hopes his Warriors will get it right and dictate the flow of the ball on their own terms, pointing at the talents out wide who can score tries that are needed.
They're a quality team. We're under no illusions how good they are and also what they've come off. They're extremely well coached, but we're also preparing well. So we need to look after that breakdown. We need to go hard in that. We need to make a big effort around looking after our own ball, and if we can get our ball on our terms, then we know we've got enough talent to be able to score some tries.
Moana Pasifika captain Adi Savea says the learnings from the 1-point loss to the Brumbies has helped their focus on the Reds, who they will meet on Friday night in Brisbane.
We talked about when we were kicking off, the Force are going to run it back and, they need 7 points to win the game. We made our tackles, but, all it took was, misread on D and Donald's under the post. So, there was a lot of positives, but, some of the things that let us down were in our control, which is something that we can look into and hopefully fix.
His head coach, Fa'alongo Noumea, says they need to keep focusing on the positives and believes they can compete with anyone if they learn to minimize their errors.
There was a lot within our errors that we made that we did ourselves. If we shore that up and, we just keep focusing on the positives, I think our game, we showed that, we can compete with anyone. It's just making sure that, again, we keep those moments that, we switch off or we make those errors that, they don't cost us.
Meanwhile, other matches in round 2 will see the Chiefs hosting the Crusaders on Friday night, the Highlanders hosting the Blues on Saturday evening, before the Brumbies and the Force battle in Canberra late Saturday night.
A new feature film, which has received positive reviews overseas, will make its debut in New Zealand cinemas. The film, Tina, follows the story of a Samoan teacher, Marita Percival, who's struggling to cope after the death of her daughter in the Christchurch earthquakes. Marita reluctantly takes on a role as a relief teacher at a private school, but soon warms up to a group of students who are in need of guidance. I caught up with the film's director Miki Mangasiva and producer Mario Ngawa and began by asking them about the film's reception at the Hawaiian International Film Festival.
It was overwhelmingly positive. As you know, taking stuff up to America, Hawaii, West Coast, where all the islanders are, or sort of pocketed in those areas, they just love seeing Pacific stories. And there's a massive appreciation for the work that goes into it, and seeing their own island people on screen as well. So overwhelmingly positive. In a funny way, it sort of humbles you a little more, because you realize that how spoiled you are coming from a place like New Zealand, close to the motherland, and there's a whole audience of all your cousins all starving for this.
How important is representation for you both, and is the film industry, is it sustainable enough to tell more of our own stories?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, it's super important that we tell more of our stories. So part of it is our identity as Aotearoa and as New Zealand, right? Like, you can't have Pacific peoples come here for the last 50, 60, 70 years and not have that represented in your creative pieces. We're a large makeup of the cultural landscape of what it is to live in New Zealand. We're throughout the sporting fields, different arenas. And so it's only natural as a community here in New Zealand that you tell stories that are unique to New Zealand. And we as Pacific people are a large part of that. We're a large voice in that. So there's that side of it. There's like telling stories that feel like a part of our identity as New Zealanders. But then the other part of it too is our identity as Pacific Islanders. We need to be telling more of these stories. It's super important that we tell these stories so that our people can see our faces up there, so that we can be inspired by that, so our younger generation can look up and see that they can do it as well, that we are hopefully carving a path for the next generation to come through, take that mantle and take it even further. And let's face it, our stories are awesome. So why are we not doing more and more of them? The stories that we do always have a proven track record. So we don't see why we're not using that as an excuse to cultivate more stories. So yeah, we need to be telling more of them, and hopefully this is just another one in a long line of others to come.
And I think just to add to that as well, Susanna, I think part of what you ask is, do we have enough Pacific stories or island stories for an industry to thrive on? Simply, the answer is yes. But part of that answer comes from, is there enough money for these stories, for these ideas to foster? You know, here in New Zealand, man, it's a struggle street trying to find financing to make your stories or bring your stories to the big screen. So my take on it is, yes, there's a whole bunch of stories from the Moana, from the Pacific that we can, get into, but the other flip side of that is that there needs to be investment into that space to help foster a lot of these creatives that are starting to come out and saying, hey, I want to tell a story, but of course there's no money, so they just turn away and go and work somewhere else for a little bit to pay the mortgage, to pay the rent, and do all those things that we need to do to live. So yes and no. I know it's not the answer that we all want to hear, and in that sense, we're lucky. We're lucky to get together and tell this wonderful story of Tina. This is this is an exception, not a rule. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, but just not enough money or investment in that space for us to tell our stories.
Nikki, with Tina being your directorial debut, what was it like making that jump from doing short films to feature films?
I'm pretty confident when it comes to directing and the craft of directing, because I've done it for so long now that nothing really scares me about the process of filmmaking anymore. It's more exciting, just getting given the opportunity, getting another go at it. So coming into this and having this green lit was like, oh man, we get to make a film. Let's get it. Let's go do it, and let's do it as well as we can do it. The more challenging side of it is perhaps the behind the scenes stuff, is what Mario was just talking about before. It's like investment, it's like the business side of getting a production like this underway. Because let's face it, it's quite a big story. It's not like we wrote two characters in a small town somewhere who develop a relationship and figure it out through the journey of the film. This is like set in Christchurch. It's got Christchurch earthquake, it's got choirs, it's got school, it's got multiple characters. So, hey, if you do something, may as well aim high, eh, Mazi? So, there was lots of excitement about doing it, never any fear, lots of learnings in the production side of it, behind the scenes side of it, the financing side of it, logistical side of it, but all really exciting. And it was just so much fun to do.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.